Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Bob the Father. Again, this is an open forum. Any questions you have about personal life, about the faith, about policies here in the parish, want to vent something, feel free. This is the time to do it. So, floor is open. Anyone have any questions or comments or concerns?
No,
Heresies.
no. We had spoken earlier, and it's been a year since All Things New was announced
Yes.
and the implementation began.
Right.
And as to be expected, there have been a number of tweaks along the way. If you're not tweaking it, you did something completely wrong.
Right. Yeah.
But I know that there's a number of parishes, both closed and not closed, that are not really happy with the way things transpired.
Mm-hmm.
And you may or may not have more insight than a lot of other people.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a lot of insight. I do know, well, I think first off, I want to preface by saying All Things New was necessary. I think we all can agree on that. Now we can talk about when it should have been done, by whom, and at what point.
Well, you could also argue that to a certain part of it has been done. And that was part of what caused some problems early on when the information gathering stage was going on, because comments were made that this hasn't been done for 50 years. Well,
in certain parts.
As an archdiocese as a whole, that's correct.
Yeah.
However, that's kind of, okay, that's not a bald-faced lie, but it is something that
it's not necessarily fully true.
Yes, it's not the whole truth.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I do know at the priest meeting. So I mean, the question was raised. What insights we went into the decision making or the rationale between some of the decisions of All Things New, and then also kind of this kind of discussion about whether it was actually not done before or done before. Now, I will say that, of course, here in North County, right, it was done. I mean, it's been done several times, really, in the last even couple decades, right? So, yeah, I think to that point, it's not necessarily completely true that it hasn't been done, and of course, even not in North County. I mean, other parts of the area too. Now, one thing they made clear when we had our priest meetings was that this was never, and they made very clear that this was never been done as an archdiocese in total. And so that's where they were kind of starting out, at least with the priests. Now, granted, I don't know what was given to the priest and what was communicated to the faithful, right? I mean, because, you play telephone and then who knows. And the other thing I think is kind of interesting is that, I know I was signed up for the weekly flock notes that went out, and I'm sure other people were too, but I have to admit, I don't know how often I really paid attention to them. I don't think it really became really down to the wire until we really got closer to Pentecost last year, where people probably paid more attention. Again, I think that's a generalization. Obviously, there were people that were paying a lot of attention from the very beginning, and some probably didn't care at all, right? So we have these extremes that are going on, but there's Midivia was probably there's some limited attention. Then while it got closer to the time, people paid more attention. Yeah, I think at the heart of this was, why was there such a stark difference between when the models were first presented and then what actually happened at the implementation of Pentecost, right? And that's a fair question. Now, I will say that at the very beginning, it was kind of presented that this whole process was really looking to merge, because the crux of the issue, right, that was initially talked about was, hey, our priest trends have been going down. And really, that's been going on for decades. I mean, I know when I first entered the seminary, there was a push by the vocation office to say, hey, if every parish in the archdiocese just sent one guy over the next decade, our priest crisis would be no problem. Now, that seems a little short-sighted, because obviously, well, if you send the guy, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get ordained. But I think if you look at the aggregate, what they're kind of saying is the odds are, if every parish sent one guy to the seminary in a decade, we probably have enough numbers to actually match our needs. Right?
Part of the problem with that, however, is each parish, while you've got the same number of parishes, the number of active participants at each parish was declining.
Oh, sure.
And so if you had more active people, you would probably have more people interested in.
Very much so, right? I mean, and so a lot of that depends on like, okay, well, where are we getting these youth from, right? I mean, some of these parishes don't have schools anymore. I mean, at that point, I think, well, actually, I think it was before the school where I came. Now, as an interesting aside, my home parish, Immaculate Heart of Mary, I was ordained 2019. A brother of mine that is now a priest, Father Rizika, who's actually at Imperial, he's a new pastor now, which is interesting too. He was ordained 2 years behind me. Now, there's 2 priestly ordinations in 2 years, right? What happened to my home parish? It got subsumed into St. Stephen's, right? So, again, I think that some of that is like, okay, yeah, look, let's try to do the best we can, but also, you know, as time went on and those first projections were given, right? It was sort of like, okay, look, we're looking at these groupings of parishes. We're not necessarily sure how it looks like. You know, we may have to maybe leave it up to the grassroots on the boots on the ground, make a determination about, is it going to be like a pastor? Is it going to be, you know, or is it going to be like a shared pastor, or are we going to maybe just, you know, merge them and just have one new parish, or what are we going to do? So those were all really open questions in the first iteration. Then they, of course, had the listening sessions, and you know, we can talk about that, how effective they were, or how non-effective, or how present. I do know that at my home parish of St. Gabriel, I'm sorry, my last assignment at St. Gabriel, when we had listening sessions, they made it kind of clear they were really focused on the parish. And the outline that was kind of rolled out was that they're focused on the parish first, and then the schools, and then the curia, right? So, in other words, it was kind of thought that there are going to be stages. They're going to kind of present this and kind of develop it, and then come up with some guidelines or some conclusions based on that input. Now we can talk about how reasonable that is, because I think at most of the listening sessions I went to, the focus was mostly on the school, and that's all fine and good. But it's also like, well, that's not really what we're talking about here, right? And some even went to the extreme of talking about like church teaching and how we should change that. And certain, well, that's again, you know, that's not what these are for. They're trying to be constructive and trying to determine what the best way forward to come together as these groupings, or is there a new solution that could be effective? I don't know if that was really understood. At least I don't think it was understood well by, at least my experience from people.
Well, the listening sessions that my wife and I attended at presentation,
right?
Since there was no school there, it was focused on the parish and what was going to happen, what's the best solution for realizing that there is a huge problem. There's not enough priests to go around. And we know from our travels to visit family and that sort of thing that in many parts of the country that we go to, it's shared parishes.
Yeah. Especially in the rural areas. I mean, you have Jeff City, you have down in Springfield, you have, well, even in Illinois. I mean, all the dioceses around us, they kind of have that model, right? Where you have maybe one priest as a pastor for 5 parishes.
And it's been that way in parts of St. Louis too.
Sure.
Not that long ago,
that's true.
All Souls and St. Jude shared pastor for.
Well, and even you know, before all things, right before it all, I mean, some of the parishes in the city had the same thing on, right? So yeah, I mean, I think there was kind of these models that were kind of presented and kind of led up to this. I do think though there was a lot of either mixed communication or just kind of like a misunderstanding of how the process worked. And I think even from the priest standpoint, you know, it was like, well, what are we going to do here? Okay, well, so there's kind of this level of like trusting the process, but also practically saying like, does this make sense? Should we maybe go a different route? And I think even the people that were kind of, you know, in planning were kind of still trying to figure it out too, and saying, well, you know, kind of trusting the Holy Spirit was going to guide this. And I think that's a good approach. But what practice steps were taken? Well, I don't know. You know, that again is that's above my pay grade. I can tell you, just because I lived with a canon lawyer, and I knew this, you know, because I lived with him, and I'm just a canon law in some ways. And so what happened shortly after those listening sessions, after the information was gathered, and even the listening session, I mean, it was also presented first off, there were going to be some representatives from this company, CLI, that was going to be doing that. And then all of a sudden it changed to, let's train some people and do it. And so from a pastoral approach, you know, it's sort of like, why would I send one of my people to be shot at, you know, in these sessions? Because I think that's what the anticipation was. A lot of these are going to just be more either griping or, you know, turning into more, you know, shots at the process or whatever it was. So that all too was sort of like, well, that seems like an interesting change. That even kind of caused you more, I know from a presbyteral standpoint, sort of like, ooh, what's really going on here? Shortly after that happened in early 2021, there was an edict that came out from the Vatican specifically giving direction when it comes to merging parishes. And what the Vatican promoted, and this became part of the canon law when it comes to merging parishes, is that you can't use priest shortage primarily as a reason, right? So the other two, now it can be two of these three, but it can't primarily be priests, right? So the other two factors they took consideration was finances, right? So is the parish lucrative? Is it maintaining its finances to the point where it can support itself, and maintain the ministries that it's designed to do? And the second factor was sacramental. So, hey, how many baptisms we've had in the last decade? How many weddings? How many funerals? Are we growing? Is it growing sacramentally and fostering a deeper growth in that community, or is it shrinking? Those were the factors that were kind of primarily came out of Rome to make those determinations. So that kind of threw a wrench in things, because now we're looking at the diocese as a whole and saying, well, wait a minute, a majority of our parishes, a good majority of our parishes, don't meet this criteria.
Yeah. Yes.
So now what do we do, right? So, okay, well, and it's interesting because I don't know who developed it, but the term pastorate then was put out, right? And so what it was kind of looked at was, it's like saying we're talking about these rural parishes.
We're making up words as we
go along. Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't think we'll find in canon law anywhere it says pastorate, but it does talk about canonical pastors. And so just like we see in other places, around us, well, okay, well, maybe we need to look at having parishes still maintain their boundary, and we're going to be sharing priestly staff. Now, how's that going to work? Because
and that's going to be
right
for many priests. That's going to be difficult.
Yes,
because you get another layer put on your shoulders.
Well, and the ratio they were kind of looking at, and they were trying. That's part of the discussion after the second iteration was, what kind of ratio do we need to get in order to actually have that to be effective? So, is it like one priest for every 500? Is it one priest for every 1,000 families? Is it one priest for every 2,000? I mean, so I think that what they settled on after that, the dust kind of settled, was one priest for every 1,000 households.
Okay.
Right, and so, okay. Well, good. So now we have some determination, and we can look at we can look at the metrics and say, well, how many households are in this boundary? Okay. Now, if we try to get to 1,000, how do we do that and do that well to where maybe we're doing a pastorate or merging to get to that kind of number, right? But then, on top of that, were some more difficult situations. So I think it was communicated, and I just remember this because I sit in those meetings and listening to these things for 6 hours. They were very, very focused really on this area because they were very aware that there have always been some changes here. There's always been these iterations and several iterations over the last several decades. So how do we best approach it to make it feasible? And I think they were primarily concerned about like, okay, getting to church. What's the best way to get to church? Is it within a reasonable time frame as far as like, does it take 15 minutes, 5 minutes, also the more geographical boundaries. Like, well, does it make sense to have it like across 70 or 270? And especially because, there's some of these parishes up here, like the Holy Name of Jesus and St. Norbert and, even Angel Mercy and others, there were huge areas. And so it's like, okay, well, do we maybe divvy these up and make new and so
just scrap everything and
redesign
all the
maybe that right. And so I think right, wrong, or indifferent, that was kind of the approach here, at least in this region, to determine, okay, what's the best boundary procedure to maintain the ratio for a given priest. And so based on that, there was a determination saying, well, it seems like these parishes, because of the numbers, because of what's going on, might work well. Do you have one priest covering these areas to do these things? And so the final iteration was kind of presented as, okay, here's what we're thinking going forward as far as like, okay, well, maybe we'll have a pastorate. And so, I don't know what the original, I can't remember off the top of my head what the last iteration was before
they've changed
the rollout
several
here.
times.
Right, yeah.
And I haven't gone back on to the website to see what's still up there that you can look at.
Yeah.
But at one time, one of the scenarios that included presentation and St. Anne had a parish that stretched from the city limits all the way almost to 270.
Which really, that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah,
right. So yeah, I mean, it's been interesting because like the parish here now, the St. Anne, it does, the border of the city is one on one side, and not quite to 270, but
it's
pretty close.
So what about Woodson Road? Somewhere in that there.
Because then All Souls comes in.
At one time, All Souls was included in that.
Right.
So it did go way out west.
Yes. And so, again, I think a lot of that was based on, okay, again, what's feasible as far as getting to church from where these people are, and also the numbers that has that kind of ratio to make it more feasible.
I don't know if I mentioned to you, from my house, which is actually in St. Anne itself, the city of St. Anne, and is technically now in All Souls Parish.
Right.
But this is another twist for the all things new. But to travel from our house, just coming east on the Rock Road to Hanley Road, come up to Natural Bridge to here, there are 19 stoplights.
Yeah. I'm aware.
Yeah,
I'm aware.
there are 19.
Oh,
you come over.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a few less because
you're right. I'm not all the way out there, but
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think depending on which way I go, I have anywhere between 7 and 10.
Yeah.
Right. And
if you wanted to come the highway to avoid the stoplights, that's fine.
Right.
But it's going to be pretty much the same time scenario.
Right.
For me, it's if you make every light, you can make it in 12 minutes.
Right.
But you seldom make every light.
Right.
So it's 45.
Yeah.
Usually it's about 12 to 17 minutes.
Right. That's sure. Yeah. I mean, so, and I guess the question there was raised like, okay, so you compare, let's say, and again, it is apples and oranges some way, but these areas here in the city compared to let's say down in St. Francis County.
They'll drive even farther.
Right. And so you're talking about a 45-minute drive out there, maybe compared, So again, I think it was trying to find that ratio and kind of being somewhat aware of the practicals of engaging in the parish life. Now, if they did it right or wrong, I think there's some things probably did right, some things probably not so. Right.
As big as the whole project was. You couldn't get it all right.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
You certainly couldn't get it all right.
Exactly. I mean, so yeah, it was maybe 6 one and half a dozen the other. And so I think, but based on those things, I'm sort of like, okay, well, this seems like this will work with numbers and with the space, and okay, fine. Now, I think the question after that was, is it going to be a pastorate? Is it going to be a merger? And I think those were surprises even after Pentecost. Because, I mean, I know that when we were down in South City, we were kind of primarily looking towards 4 parishes in our community. It was going to be St. Gabriel, St. Raphael, which is right across the park, which is in the same neighborhood. We had St. Joan of Arc, and I think we had St. Mary Magdalene, right?
So it would be, you anticipate it being 4 parishes under one pastor?
Well, yeah, we were kind of thinking, okay, there's going to be something here with these 4 parishes. We didn't necessarily think it was being merger just because, well, it seemed like everyone was pretty feasible. But even that got then split. And so it then became Gabriel Raphael are going to be a pastor to share a pastor. Because again, I mean, you're looking there then at like, between Gabriel and Raphael, there's probably about 2,000 families, right? And so if you go towards, start going farther east, the population declines, but still probably about 1,000 between those 2 parishes, right? So, okay, you're looking at maybe 3 priests in that area. And they're pretty reasonably spaced, so you can get them pretty easily, right? In the city, things are more compact, so whatever. So that was kind of surprising because we didn't necessarily anticipate that. And so that kind of shifted from, let's come together these 4, then, I guess we need to focus on these 2, right? And then we have like 2 months to do that. So what do we got to do? Let's figure out a mass schedule. Are we going to come together in certain, like,
the big
like,
ones?
yeah, like parish, we're going to have the same parish council. We're going to, you have to separate the finance councils. Canonically, you have to do that in those situations. But what can we come together and do? I mean, because I'm sorry for anyone from St. Raphael or Gabriel listening, but it's the same parish. I'm sorry. It is. I love all of you down there, and you're all in my heart, but also there's really not a big difference between Gabriel and Raphael, personality-wise, just socioeconomically. They just basically were two parishes do different ways of doing things, but it was all directed towards the same thing. So that was kind of what you had down there was a lot of type A personalities. So trying to get it all together was kind of difficult. And so I think it would make sense that we had two priests assigned there. And then when I left, it was sort of like poor Father Molini was only down there by himself. He had sacramental help, but the practicality, you have two schools, you have two finance councils, two parish councils, two Vincent de Pauls, two blah blah blah, Boy Scout trips, whatever. So
not enough hours in the day.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm glad he got someone there. Congratulations, Father Lawson, once again. So again, I think there was a surprise for everybody after this came out in Pentecost. Was like, oh, this was not anticipated. Now what do we do? Right. I think the idea was empowering the current priests that were there to make these determinations in the transition, and then the new priests can make final determinations once they get on the ground. Now, what led open to was certain appeals, right? So you could appeal to the Archbishop to say, Your Excellency, can you maybe reconsider this and make a determination? And here's some maybe evidence and some factors maybe you didn't take consideration when we made this decision. I don't know of anyone that sent the letter to the Archbishop that was actually changed. So yeah, so the only recourse at that point canonically was to submit to Rome. Now, you could have done that through the Archdiocese or done that separately, right? And again, I don't know how people actually knew that either.
I was confused on that.
Yeah,
issue, which
I don't think you're alone.
I would have appealed to Rome.
Yeah. I don't think you're alone on that. I think there was a lot of confusion. And so what ended up happening then was, I think the Archdiocese would have preferred it went to the Archdiocese to send to Rome. But it had to be explicitly stated.
Course.
Yeah. I want to appeal this to Rome, right?
Not that I think the Archdiocese is evil.
Yeah.
But of course they would rather you appeal to the Archdiocese.
And it's understandable there could be a lack of trust there, maybe, in the situation.
As one of the people who's been through this on several occasions, yes, that's part of the issue is we've seen this movie before. Mm-hmm. We know what the ending's like. How can we expect anything different to come?
Right. So let's talk a little about the appeals process, how that kind of worked. Okay. So in order to actually send to Rome, you either write it yourself or explicitly state in your resubmit that you want this to go to Rome. So if that wasn't done, it wasn't done. Now, what Rome, what we call the Roman Rota, which is like the Supreme Court of the Catholic Church, right? As a matter of fact, our former Archbishop Cardinal Burke, was the apostolic signature. I mean, he was like the Chief Justice, right? Before he was sort of taken out. Anyway, whatever. Yeah. So the Rota, in my understanding, and this is based on just my canon law class and the canon law teacher we had, who's also a former associate in this parish, the Rota kind of looks at itself as a check and balance, right? So, for instance, the reason I'm a pastoral administrator is because Archbishop Carlson had a situation when he was the bishop of Minnesota that didn't work out, and even though it went to the Rota kind of sided with the priest, even though the rationale kind of made sense from the Archbishop's standpoint. And I think they can look at that as a check on power, right? So, but primarily when it comes to these situations, what they really are technically looking at is, was there a process? What are the guidelines of the process? And where was that process followed? So in other words, in order to appeal and get the appeal to go through, there'd be some new information that wasn't even known or wasn't submitted, or maybe it was submitted but wasn't looked at, in order for the Rota to say, oh yeah, because of this issue, it seems like that's not a good determination, and so therefore we'll do this instead. Which is why we're seeing some of these decisions come back. Most of them have come back and said no, right? But there have a few come back which have been surprising, saying, yeah, maybe that's a factor, and we have to take a look at that, right? So just recently, Angela Marisi, right, came back and said, yeah, you make some good points, so it looks like you're going to maintain your parish status. So what that turns into from a submission, subsuming into a pastorate in some way, or really it's kind of a hybrid there because you have a pastorate with Angela Mercy, but then you have a subsuming of Holy Name of Jesus and St. Norbert, right? Okay, whatever. Blessed Teresa, they came back and said, no, that doesn't really look like it's working for you. So, okay, whatever. Now, within that, then, there is some leeway from a pastoral standpoint about what can be done. So it seems like Father Kemp, he's keeping both schools of BTC, of course, Sacred Heart, open. Okay, and if that can be done, great, right? But you're still a parish coming together as one, right? And so you would call it maybe the Blessed Teresa Cuddle at Sacred Heart Parish or whatever he wants to do, but that's kind of what's going to happen here, right? Because you're coming down to one parish, and even this, there could be determinations about maybe just having a new name, right? Which could have been done here. I guess it could still be done depending on what people want to do with that.
Well, when they did close one of the parishes that we were at, that is what happened. They gave a new name to it. That's how Holy Trinity came about, because it was St. Gregory's parish.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. I mean, I think there's some openness. Now, I think what we'll find here is that because St. Anne goes back for so long to 1856, it might be hard to say, maybe we should come soon. But I don't think that necessarily is a reason. I think part of that is if we're trying to get one, I'm not opposed necessarily to maybe discussing that, right? Maybe. So those appeals kind of started coming back based on these new information or whatever, or basically saying, even though the process, you didn't really follow it the way you intended, and so, whatever. And so you start seeing some of these appeals come back and say, fine. What you kind of expect from the Rota. I think sometimes they definitely kind of try to check that power, and sometimes maybe even be random as far as what they're doing, right? I mean, because they may be looking at other factors other than is there a finance issue and or a sacramental issue and or whatever? You just be like, well, does it seem like these people are being abused in some way? And so, whatever. Again, I don't know the inner workings of the Rota. I don't deign know, and I really probably don't want to know. But that's kind of how the appeal process kind of worked, right? Or was supposed to work. Now, I think what's the frustrating thing, I think, from a pastoral standpoint, and I know I feel so, I'm kind of lucky in that respect, but some of my brothers are experiencing this where they're still waiting for this to come back. And so they can't necessarily start that process of coming together until they get an answer. So for instance, our neighbor, Father Scheider, he's in charge of 4 parishes right now in the city. And originally they were supposed to be all subsumed into one, and determinations made as far as, and that's the other thing too. The pastor has determinations like what buildings are going to be used, what churches, schools, or what could we sell, could we, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Now, on top of this, now that we have all these buildings, there also is a process to deconsecrate a church. Now, that is much harder now than it was several years ago. And I just found this out recently because it was brought up in one of these discussions, why, or maybe it was something else, but someone said, well, this happened before with Assumption and St. Paul, and it was, the priest there was very quick to sell it, and he was able to do it very quickly. Why can't we do that now? And I was like, well, I don't know about back then, but I do know that now, in order to do that, you have to go to Rome. That has to go through a whole process. You have to find a buyer. You have to kind of have all your ducks lined up before they even happens. So I said maybe it was possibly that they got that lined up and they were anticipating in this and did it all. But then I found out that the law was different back then than it is today. So to actually go through that process, it's a long, drawn-out process. So it's not like tomorrow I can just go ahead and sell whatever I want to sell. It has to go through that whole thing. So to that end, for Father Scheider, he can't really make those terminations yet because we still are waiting to hear back from Rome as far as these appeals are concerned. So you have these 4 parishes now with St. Matthew still waiting to hear back. And until that happens, he's kind of in limbo, right? So again, if there's good reason to say that St. Matthew should stay its own parish, well, probably what's going to happen there is the same thing happened with St. Norbert and Holy Name. They'll probably subsume the other parishes into one and have a separate pastorate where he'll be the pastor of both. So that's kind of how the whole thing works. Now, the other thing to consider too is that we're only in phase 2 right now, of all things.
Is it still on the? Originally, they said that it would take until 2026 to be fully implemented.
Yeah.
And I know end games can be extended out a ways.
Right. And I think that we're looking at there for like the entire process, right? So in other words, what's going on here maybe at St. Anne may be different for, let's say, St. Joe Cottleville, right? So St. Joe Cottleville, they're kind of done, right? I mean, they didn't really have much to do, so it's like, well, okay. Now recently though, just this past weekend was announced that the pastor there is retiring. Even though it happened right after all the changes happened, but he's retiring, which caused a domino effect. So Monsignor Callan's retiring. Father Brian Fisher from Wentzville is going there.
Okay.
Father Dan Shaughnessy from Imperial is going to Wentzville. Father Yates from Clare of Assisi is now going to Imperial. And Father Foy's, the current associate, who was a pastor before, is becoming the pastor. So it's a four-way move, which probably is the most efficient you could do in the scenario. So that's what's going on up there. But yeah, so certain parishes, there's no further action required. Now, some may ask, and kind of maybe rightly so, well if the ratio is 1 to 1,000, even let's say here at St. Anne, right? If let's say everyone from Presentation came to St. Anne, we all are in one parish, that's really only still about 700 families, right? There's other parishes that are standalone that have about the same number, right? And some may say, maybe, I don't know, sarcastically, well, some of those places they haven't combined and they're less people. They do have a lot of money there. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, that could be a possibility. I'm sure it would be one factor, I suppose.
It has to be a factor.
I would imagine.
To a certain extent.
Right.
It's like the free shortage. It's not going to be the only factor, but it has to be something that enters into play.
Well, and I think another thing they kind of look at too is what kind of ministries are going on up there. So, like for instance, I think one of the most glaring ones, at least ones I was kind of, I don't say shocked, but kind of surprised by, was Immaculata. Now, Immaculata is in a rather affluent neighborhood. It does kind of span into Ladue in the Clayton area. But also, I think the factor that Immaculata has there is they actually have a ministry, especially to children with special needs. Right. So, if you were to, let's say, subsume that or do a pastorate on that, that itself might be a full-time job where a priest may be present and actually a specialized priest may be present in order to do that. So I think that's the other factor too. Money probably, it was. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but also I think they're looking at the ministries that are provided by these particular parishes too. So I don't know. I mean, again, these are all kind of speculations when it comes to these final decisions, because ultimately it was up to the Archbishop. And he could have said, you know what, I don't like the cut of this jib, so let's just do it this way. Now, I think if you were to appeal that, the road might come back and say, yeah, well, that doesn't seem like a very good reason. But whatever, I think that's kind of the idea behind a lot of these things. So, yeah.
Do you know, this just popped into my head because it's kind of the situation that I noticed when was looking at the some of the maps that they had in the listening sessions involved locations where various parishioners live.
Right.
And
the scatter maps, right?
Scatter maps. And there are a lot of the parishes, especially the ones, let's say this side of 270, have a lot of people who don't live in the parish, but they attend there on a regular basis. And it's because they grew up there, they've got formed a detachment to the community and everything. But even though they choose to drive 15 minutes, half hour, 45 minutes.
Sure. So that's a good point. I mean, so how do we define a parishioner, right? So a parishioner, based on canon law, is defined by one that has residence in a particular territory, and or one who has formally made process to engage within that territory.
To register.
Right. So, to that point, right, so let's say somebody who lived, let's say, in the city, made an appeal to the Archdiocese about St. Anne. And this actually happened on a few occasions. where there was appeals made from a particular person who maybe attended the church on a regular basis or even engaged in the parish life, but was not within the territory or made a formal process to engage. So technically they're not parishioners. And so what would happen is, based on process alone, those would be rejected.
Because they
are not parishioners, right? So yeah, so those scatter maps were interesting because I think in a lot of places what they found was there were parishioners that were living outside the boundary, which I think has been a trend going on for quite a while. And to that point, I mean, so the other factor there too is what they also realized was that there's a lot of younger people, especially, that aren't registered anymore. Yeah, but again, even with their case, they would still be like for instance in this subsuming process, right? One thing that I had to do right away when I first got here was send letters to the former parishioners of presentation to say, welcome to St. Anne, and here's basically the guidelines that were given by the Archdiocese, saying that, you technically live in our boundary, but if you've made a formal process to engage in another parish, cool. Just let us know so we can actually provide the information to that particular parish, primarily your sacramental records, or financial contributions for your whatever. What ended up happening is we still have 200 people who haven't told us what they're doing. So at a certain point, you have to say, okay, well, what do we do with those people? And if they haven't formally let us know what they're doing or formally made a process to engage somewhere else, as long as they're in our boundary, they're now ours. Now that causes some interesting perspectives.
If they don't live within the boundaries of St. Anne or in Presentation Parish,
yes.
So
they fall within the territory that they're in then. Okay. So let's say you had 40 people that currently live in All Souls boundary, but they were registered here at St. Anne, or I'm registered at Presentation, and then they have not made a formal process to either register here at St. Anne or another parish, right? Technically now they're All Souls.
I think I know several people who fit that.
Right.
That's friends of ours.
Yeah.
That have said they're still church shopping.
Yeah, but I mean at this point, I mean they can do that. That's fine. Once they made a formal process to actually register, and now here's the catch with that too, is that if they were to do that, let's say they live in All Souls, but they say, we've been going up to Florissant, to All Sacred Heart, and we're kind of liking it up there, or maybe St. Ferdinand. So we kind of like there. I think we're going to register there. Cool. They can go to Florissant and go to St. Ferdinand and ask Father Lilo, hey, Father, I want to register here. And he's like, great. I got to check with Father Ochoa, right? Because you're living in their boundary right now, and so he has to release you technically to do that. It's a formality, but it is a canonical requirement because the shepherd of that particular soul is the territory of that soul.
Have you heard of anybody being denied that dispensation?
No.
Good.
No, I've never heard.
I wouldn't think that would happen.
No.
But
as a matter of fact, I think it's one of those things where it's like I take this tack. We have a couple people already who have registered here in St. Anne and now have formally rescinded their registration to be registered somewhere else. Cool. I'm not gonna whatever. Now it's interesting because those people still come to mass and stuff, and it's like, okay, whatever. But but I think that's more what's the good of the soul. So if you're getting nourished in another place that's not here, good. I don't care. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It's not that I don't care, but just like I understand I'm not everyone's cup of tea, or the parish is not everyone's cup of tea. So as long as you're going to a Catholic mass, good.
Yeah, you're
right?
happy with
Yeah,
that.
sure, fine, right.
The problem is that you don't really know.
Right.
And there's outside of tracking them down, hiring a private investigator, or whatever, you're not going to know.
Right. Now you could say, well, what we could do at this point, and I think I get some flack from Eileen on this. We could send envelopes because we know who's in our territory. We can say, okay, you're now ours. Here's the envelopes, and see who sends them back. right? It
says, wouldn't necessarily send them back.
Maybe not necessarily, but the fact they accept them would be a tacit acceptance, right? Now you could say, well, we'll see who turns them in.
That could be a legal aspect of it, but I don't know that it's in reality. It's not.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm talking about this purely from a canonical standpoint, right? So I mean, practicalities are different, right? So like I know plenty of people who also contribute to one parish, but they go to mass somewhere else. Okay, whatever. Now you could say, part of the precepts of being a Catholic is contributing to the good of the church, right? Now, you could say, well, I'm contributing to this parish, I'm going over here. Okay. But I think the disconnect there would be, well, if I should be contributing to the parish where I'm actually going to receive these gifts, right? So, because if I'm not doing that, that actually hurts the parish, right? You're not hurting me. You're not hurting, Father Madden or the Archdiocese for that matter. You're really hurting the parish. And so when people are saying, well, I even though I'm going to go to mass here, I'm going to contribute and go somewhere else. Well, okay, you can do that, but how is that impacting, right? Because if you're gonna go somewhere else, go somewhere else. That's fine, right? Great. And that's not to say you can't come to mass here. Maybe it's a better time for like during the day or whatever. Okay, but also maybe when you come to mass here, give them a couple dollars, whatever. Or go to mass there, So I think that's a factor, and I have to admit, like when I was, on my own, so to speak, after I left St. Louis, I did register my very first place I was living in Renton, Washington, and then I never registered anywhere else after that. And I guess, and the way I kind of approach it, and this may be just more a generational thing, I would only give if I was really asked. Like I wasn't necessarily, I didn't meet this precept of the church. I wasn't giving on a regular basis. If like the pastor or there was some drive or whatever, sure. Which I think is interesting to see that trend now with like Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. That there's not this kind of consistent effort to provide for those needs.
Which doesn't make your job any easier.
It doesn't. But also, too, so that's the thing. Again, I'll say this. Financially, we're secure, right now. I know there was kind of a bit of a scare, but I think we're getting some clarity on that. Shared accounting, as much as they can help, also sometimes they can hinder and cause some stress. But good people there, and they do good work. But sometimes it's like, oh, what's going on here? Where's this coming from? To that end, we're doing fine financially, which is great. As a matter of fact, after the auction, everything this past April, we'll be in the black from the St. Anne Parish standpoint about almost $250,000, which is great, right? That's amazing. And a lot of that comes from not only the old the current parishioners of St. Anne, but also those that were coming over from presentation have been a great contribution to the parish, not only financially but also spiritually and practically. So we praise God for those gifts and hope we can kind of grow that and keep on going. But I think that's the thing that's sometimes missed. I think when it comes to these things, like, oh yeah, well, I'll go to confession once a year, and I'll go to mass on Sunday, and maybe I'll fast on the days that I want to fast, and I'll not refrain from meat on Fridays of Lent. But the whole contribution thing, well, I don't know, it's kind of, why do I have to pay for the sacraments? Well, you're not paying for the sacraments. You're paying to keep the lights on. You're paying to keep the doors open. That's kind of what those factors come into play. And I do regret that I didn't realize that earlier in life. But
who does?
Right, right. Because, when you're 20s, my main focus is I want to make money. I don't make money if I give it away. Right? So I'm going to try and do that.
It's hard to think about your 50s and 60s when you're 22.
Exactly right.
Well, it's hard to think about the light bill at the library when you're just 22 and you just want one book and you go in there and you don't think about everybody's got to pay a tax so we can have this open and it'd be nice.
Right. Yeah. Right. So to that end, so I think one of the ways we're going to look to grow, at least in the next few months, we're going to do focus a lot on evangelization. And one way that I think we're going to do that is in the next few weeks, I'm going to obtain a list, just so everyone knows, of all the non-Catholic parties that are attached or associated with the parish. And what I'm going to do is invite them to RCA in the fall. In addition to that, one thing I've been considering too is starting an evangelization team that was kind of based on not only those who have interest, but also those that attended the Vicariate evangelization meeting that happened a couple months ago. So those are going to be in the works. And I think through that, we're going to try and grow. I'm very much aware that there's a lot of ground here, a lot of fruitful ground that we can actually engage with and help us. So that's going to be, I think, the mission over the next couple years at least, to kind of continue this development of phase 2. Because that's really, I think, what the Archbishop envisions is this evangelization movement to help grow, right? And I think the other thing is, I always say when it comes to evangelization, it's not let's talk about Jesus, it's let's talk about your family. How about those Cardinals? How about the Blues? It's that game. It's maintaining that, starting that engaging in a relationship that can grow. And so I think that's where we're going to be moving towards. And I know a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that. Like, for instance, my last homily at St. Gabriel, and I don't know if it's been effective or not. I haven't really been back there to see. But one thing I challenged the people at both St. Raphael and St. Gabriel, that I said that, I don't want cards, I don't want money, I don't want gifts. I don't really, to tell you the truth, I don't even want to see you come up to St. Gabriel. So they say, I don't want you to follow me for sure, because it's not about the Father Mark show, it's about Jesus. But I said, what I would hope, if you really thought that I did a great job here and you want to honor me, invite someone to Mass that hasn't been to one. Right? That's what I want. Right? That would make me happy. That would fulfill a great desire. Now, I said that fully aware that there were probably 90% of the people in that room.
Very uncomfortable.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But I think that's the problem, is we have to be uncomfortable. We have to be okay with being uncomfortable. That's how we grow. Right? And I think that's what's going to pay dividends. Because here's the other thing too. For anyone, I don't know, I know Holy Spirit had Acts. Right? Acts retreats, Acts teams. Okay.
I wasn't at Holy Spirit, so I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity had.
They had.
Oh, maybe they had Chirp or.
Yeah. Chirp,
okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the same way. I mean, so one thing is that when you're trying to develop these things in the parish is you invite people, right? And so you go to guys that you maybe see, or or to be on the soccer field, or in the lunchroom, or whatever it may be, and say, hey, I got this retreat coming up. You don't want to come? Now, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get no, or you get maybe, but that one, you're going to get yes, right? And if everyone gets that one yes, you double your number, right? In the same way, I think you have to look at that from a standpoint of the faith. That, I'm perfectly comfortable with a stranger, like, hey, do you want to come to Mass sometime? They may say, no, that's not for me. Okay. But I can invite. And I think the other point of this too is, I think sometimes when we say that no, we either become deflated or we feel attacked. And that's the key. We can't feel that.
Right.
Right? We just have to feel like, I'm going to invite you, and it's your call. I'm going to put the ball in your court. Then it's up to you. And in the meantime, I'm going to pray for you.
Just plant.
I'm not going to tell you I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for you. And we'll see. Because here's the other thing about that too. It may not be the first time, or the third time, or the 15th time, but maybe the 20th time. That person's going to be like, no, I'll give it a shot. Right? That's how we evangelize. That's how we get people to grow. That's how we get to grow the church, grow the community, grow the parish. So anyone watching out there, that's just my opinion. I think it's effective. And I think that's also what the Archbishop was kind of saying in his pastoral letter, was that, the saints that he used was very interesting to reference in that letter. Have you guys read the letter? He used these saints that kind of in very small, subtle, but ways, engage people on a one-on-one basis that end up converting, right? Like Teresa Lisieux, for instance, right? She was a Carmelite nun. She spent most of her adult life cloistered, and she died at the age of 24. But what a crazy impact she's had on the local church, right?
She considered herself a missionary.
Right. Everyone knows her, right? Everyone knows her. Even non-Catholics know. You say Little Flower. Oh, yeah. So, as a matter of fact, one well, this is a different way, but one we're going to be celebrating in a couple days is St. Anthony of Padua. You know, I think what's funny about him, I'm probably going to preach about this, I'm going to maybe give it some way, but, you know, people tend to go to him because they lost something, right? 2020, look around, somebody lost Camping Found. But, you know, his nickname.
It's true, my wife.
Yeah, I've done that.
And it works.
Carol,
it works.
Our office lady, put it on front of my desk because we were trying to remember that. She goes, no, I got it. I'll remember it. I'll remember it. Now we say it all the time.
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, it works.
It works.
Now, what's funny about that is his nickname was the Hammer of Heretics. I mean, he was so sound in his understanding of theology and philosophy that he would take on anybody in debate and he would destroy them, right? With the truths of the faith. And now part of that is he wasn't afraid because he knew he had truth on his side, which we all do. But I think that's a part of it too. I think eventually when you start inviting people and engaging with people, there comes a question to where they start questioning, like, why are you like you? Right? And I hope the answer to that is, well, because I have a deep faith and I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Would you like to find out more? Right? And that doesn't mean we have to know everything. But I think we just need to present it and invite and see where that leads. Right? So that's phase 2. So that's going to be coming up the next few years. Look at those, right, going forward. Then phase 3, of course, is relaxation and rest.
No, phase 3 is begin preparation for the next.
Yeah, right.
All things even newer.
Yeah. The next new, right? Yeah. We're good. Well, yeah. So yeah, does that? I don't know. Is that giving you insights or?
Yes, to a certain extent.
Okay.
There's a lot that They started this process a little bit better than what it was going through the first several round of parish closings,
right.
And I had hopes that it was going to be better, but in the end, it wound up being the same old.
Yeah.
The archdiocese is going to do what the archdiocese wants to do.
Yeah.
And
right.
You can hope to influence them. You can beg. You can cajole. You can just present your arguments. But they're going to decide what they want to decide.
Right. From an overarching standpoint, yeah.
And they may or may not give you an explanation as to why they want it, and which is part of the problem I've got right now is that we decided it. Oh, but what about we decided it?
Yeah. And listen, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, obviously, I think the one thing they did better was my understanding was like in the past it was just like, okay, now you're going to this church as your church now. Now there seems a little more openness to be like, look, you guys make that call. And it also seems like there's a little more, and this is probably because of the new canonical things that are put in place, they're really kind of leaving up to the pastors to make like these actual more detailed determinations.
And hopefully that's going to play out.
Yeah.
We didn't have that at the beginning of our
well, I will say, Dan,
sector.
Yeah.
Well, whether we like it or not, at least there is a person in place.
Right.
We know there's what's going on, and we know who to go to, and we know how to approach.
Because I will say, I mean, for me, it would be much easier if the archdiocese made the calls and said, "We're going to keep these open, do all this stuff," and I'd be like, "Hey, you know what? I don't know, that's all there. I can't really do it." But again, I think my approach is I'm going to try and do the best I can to maintain the 2 sites, and I think we're going to go from there. As an aside, to that point, actually it's kind of helpful we do have these 2 sites right now because we're still working the air conditioner. We should know by Thursday what's going to happen with that. Now, if it's not fixed by Thursday, the plan is we're going to have all masses at presentation this weekend.
Oh, okay.
Just FYI. Okay.
You felt the breeze blowing this morning?
Right, yeah. So that's the plan going forward. If we can't get the air conditioner fixed here, that's going to be the plan for this weekend.
Okay, since I'm a lector at the Saturday Mass, I'll be interested in finding that out.
Right, and I think
we find out?
We're going to communicate through the email blasts and probably put it on the social media stuff. So we'll make sure it's out there.
Go put a sign on the door too.
Probably, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Yeah, we'll probably do that for sure.
I'm not a big Benny man, but I would bet that you'll have at least a half a dozen people who will still show up.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I know they're trying. They've done a lot to figure out what's not broken, so that's good. But I know they're trying. I know Rick and some of them, his people are trying to figure out what to do with it. So we'll keep everyone informed of that for this weekend. But I also have to let Father Kavanaugh know because I have a wedding this weekend at St. Joseph Shrine. So Father Dan Kavanaugh is going to hear confessions for me. So I better let him know too. So he
that would be really
yeah. Well, he'll be able to get in either.
Dress code because if I'm going to lecture over here and there's no AC, I'm going to shed that.
Oh, I don't blame you.
Jacket.
No. Like I said, there's no AC.
More layers than I have.
If there's no AC, we're having over a presentation. We're going to make that call by Thursday at the latest.
Since it's supposed to be the hottest so far this year. This week.
So we're going to make sure that everyone's going to be taken care of. Which again, that's kind of a benefit of having two places. So good.
That's the good and the bad because you've got two places where the AC can go.
Right, that's true. But you would hope that odds would be one of them.
Right, you would expect.
Yeah, right. So yeah, that's just an aside. But yeah. Any other questions or comments or anything else?
Well, if you need questions or comments, I'm sure I can come up with something.
For it. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
No,
I had a chance to vent a little bit.
Good.
Express my concerns.
Yeah,
Because I know in the past sometimes, specifically more so from priests, I think, have said it's not a parish versus Lindell or parish versus archdiocese proposition. It's not, but it heads like that.
Right.
And my response is, well, you work for them.
Yeah.
You don't work for us, even though you're here. You minister to us, but you're working for them. So there is a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, you're right.
History tells me that they care less about me than they do about their fiefdom, which to a certain extent they have to do that.
Sure.
It's like in any organization,
well,
the head office is worried about one thing.
Yeah.
A branch is worried about
another. I mean, I can tell you, Dan, I am working the Curia, not just because I'm a priest, archdiocese, or archbishop, but also I do have a curial position. I'm on, I don't know if many people know this, but I'm on the Respect Life Apostolate Board. I'm the chaplain, the spiritual director for the Respect Life office. And so that means I have my own key card to get into the chancery, everything else, right? So, but no, from my observance of what goes on that's another thing that was kind of, I guess, maybe disheartening about all this, but also kind of confusing, was as I was talking about, there was kind of this discussion of parish first, schools, and then chancery, curia. That I think the expected outcome of all this was that the curia was going to shrink in some way, right? Because the question is, well, do you really need all these people to do all these things, and is it really necessary to have, efficiency-wise, to have these kind of perceived bloated offices that no one really knows what they do? And I mean, to that point, I mean, I have to admit, there's a lot of offices in the Curia I don't interact with because I don't necessarily need to, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have something they're doing, right? Yeah, right, exactly.
There'll be 6 other parishes.
Exactly, right, exactly. So to that point, it was sort of like, well, okay, I think the perception was, well, okay, we're going to shrink the Curia. We're going to kind of be more efficient, be more lean. So there's been this kind of great question about, well, okay, well, what is the purpose of the deaneries now when we have these vicariates who are kind of taking the place of the deanery, but in some ways not. So I think a lot of pastors have been talking about maybe having either pastoral groupings within the deaneries, or we actually have more deaneries, right? Because it seems like we're not necessarily doing that anymore. We had an approach, and I know our dean, who is Monsignor Turek over at Christ the King, he's often asked, like, I don't know what we're gonna do. I don't really know what our deanery meetings, I don't know what you're going to talk about because. So yeah, it's been kind of fascinating from that perspective too. All right. Other thoughts or questions?
I learned a lot.
All right. Well, great. Yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it, guys. So have a good night, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see.
Hopefully.